Hello, everybody out there in TV and the interweb land. Thank you so much for joining us. We are at Southwestern Law School's 7 Deadly 1L Sins, the webinar. I'm Professor Hillary Kane, Prof. K to my fans on live chat, and I'm a very proud graduate of Southwestern Law School back in 1993. I have the great pleasure of coming to the beautiful Wilshire building every day and working with the gentleman to my right. But before I introduce our guest, we got to pay our bills. Really want to thank the admissions, IT, and communications and marketing team and our sponsors, Southwestern Student Bar Association and the Offices of Student Affairs and Academic Success. Okay, now, to my right, I have the very accomplished and very passionate professor and author, Ira Shafiroff. You were my dean of students back in the day.
Yes.
You recently wrote an article for the Daily Journal. I have legal proof that the article actually exists, and we'll send you a link to it. I just want to say, I think you nailed it. I wish I had been armed with this knowledge when I arrived here at Southwestern. What inspired you to write the article?
I've been teaching a long time. I've had many students, and I see good students who don't fully grasp what they have to do. Eventually they get it, but they can get it so much sooner. And so here are the 7 deadly sins so that everyone can get it sooner.
Awesome. So before we go into the sins, I just want to mention that the first 100 people to register and log on can interact with us in the live chat. So send your questions and we will answer as many of them as we can. Okay, 7 deadly sins.
Yes.
Sounds a little ominous. And 1L for parents or people that don't know just signifies the first year of law school. 1L, 1 law. Which is the most important sin?
Well, it's a good question. I think they're all important. That's why I narrowed it down to 7. But if I had to choose one of most importance, I'd say it's the last, which is do not violate your school's honor code. You know, people do dumb things. Everyone does dumb things. People make mistakes, but you really can't in law school, because if you do something dealing with integrity, a matter of character, then you have a problem, because then if an honor code committee finds you breach some provision of the honor code, you're going to have a mark, literally a mark on your transcript. That creates all sorts of problems, such as many firms won't even hire you with an indication of not academic, but character discipline on your transcript. And guaranteed 100% admission to the bar will be delayed. In the vast majority of cases, you'll still be admitted to the bar, but until the bar investigates the matter, because they investigate everything, you can figure a delay of 6 months to a year, easy. So do not violate your school's honor code. Play it by the book.
And speaking of by the book, you often give the example that we should try to emulate a biblical character. So tell us about your John the Baptist analogy. I'd love that.
Well, John the Baptist is in the Gospels, and John the Baptist was known for his integrity and celibacy. Now, I don't want to get into the celibacy. I'm not saying I support it or I'm against it, but as to his integrity, yes, channel John the Baptist.
This is a great time to change sins. Okay, sin number 1, replicating college, and I'm just dismayed because I was really looking forward to a lot of beer pong and ramen and all-nighters in law school. Not happening?
You could do the ramen, no all-nighters. All-nighters, no good in law school. Look, in college, many of us crammed to the last minute, stayed up all night, did well on our exams. Many of us cut classes. Many of us partied, perhaps too much in college. And that was all okay. You could still get good grades. You can't do it in law school. In law school, you can't cram. You know that. We know that. Everyone who's a lawyer knows that. You just can't cram. There's just too much, and it's too intense. You have to pace yourself so that you're doing your work all through the semester as you go along. So cramming is out. Cutting class, that's also out. A lot goes on in the classroom. The professor gives you a lot of good information, leads you along the line towards your learning the law. And so partying and cutting and cramming, that's out in law school. You have to approach law school like a full-time job. You show up every day with a clear head, ready to put in a solid 8-9 hours a day, and that's law school.
Sounds familiar.
It does.
It does sound familiar. So I think that's a good segue into one of my favorite sins, and which I think people should use every day, which is the not thinking. It sounds kind of like a no-brainer to not think, but what do you mean by that, not thinking?
Law school is all about thinking. You see, a lot of people starting law school think that law school is about memorizing. You memorize rules of law. And what people too often don't understand, and here's a sin and which leads into a trap. Oh, I just have to memorize the rules. No, there's too many rules to memorize. What you have to do is you have to go to a quiet place and you have to think. And when you're reading your cases, which is the heart of law school learning, especially for the first year, you're reading appellate cases and you have to think. Think critically. As you're reading the case, for example, is what the judge writing, does it make sense? Does it make sense internally? Meaning, does the judge say one thing, but ends up doing another? Does it make sense externally? Does the court cite to legal precedent, but then the court doesn't follow that legal precedent? So it's all about thinking. And so what I tell students to do, you have to unplug yourself, which is ironic considering we're doing this, but you have to unplug when you're doing your work, when you're preparing for class, when you're writing a memo for a legal writing class. You have to pull the plug on your phone, on your Instagram, on all of those things. Go to a quiet place and start to think.
Okay, so when you're studying, don't let people slide into your DMs. Is that what you're saying?
No.
It's like whatever that means.
You need quiet. You know, there's so much tumult in the world today. It's hard to find a quiet place to think. You can't even go to a coffee shop anymore and read because you have the drone of music and espresso machines going on. Go to a quiet place, your room, your library, and start to think.
Okay, we have a question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This is from Roxanne from Los Angeles, local girl.
Hi, Roxanne.
Hi, Roxanne. If I took law classes in college, can I expect the ones in law school to be similar?
That's a
great question.
It's a great question. Almost certainly what you're going to experience in law school is totally different. In your undergraduate law classes, you probably learned a lot of rules. But in law school, yes, there are rules, but only in a very loose manner of speaking because it's all about thinking. I'll give you an example, which I cover in the 7 Deadly 1L Sins article. In undergraduate, you may learn the various elements of a rule of law. But in law school, it's that and much more. So, for example, in law school, maybe Abel owns the land. But then again, maybe Baker owns the land. But then again, maybe Olivia never even transferred her property to Abel or Baker. And so in answering law school questions, whether in class or on an exam, what everyone is interested in is why. Why does Abel own the land? Why does Baker own the land? Why is it that maybe Olivia never even transferred the land? And in getting to this answer of why, you may have to rely on legal precedent. You may have to rely on economic policy. You may have to rely on social policy. You may have to rely on logic. You may have to rely on grammar and syntax. Any or all of those could come into play at any one time. And I am almost ready to guarantee, in fact, I will guarantee, that kind of reasoning never went on in undergraduate. So it's good that you took pre-law courses undergraduate, but is that the same thing as what you're going to get in law school? Absolutely not.
So good foundation. So
right.
you might have a little bit of a head start because you'll understand the concepts.
Right.
But prepare to put on your thinking cap, which leads, I think, to a troubling sin, which is failing to embrace ambiguity, because I know I probably have a line of students that want to shoot me in my sleep. Probably not so violent, sorry, that want to like beat me up because the answer to almost every question they ask me is, it depends.
It depends. And then you always follow up with, Well, it may be this because, answering why, or on the other hand, it could be that because.
And even
why.
if,
yes,
or
on my, and this is what 1Ls find very hard to comprehend when they enter law school. And here again, so different than undergraduate, and herein is the ambiguity. On law school exams, and I'll speak for my own property exams because I teach property at Southwestern, almost all of my questions, almost all of my issues are purposefully gray. There's no definitive answer. In fact, I don't even give points for an ultimate conclusion. I don't care if you conclude that Abel owns the property, or if Baker owns the property, or if Olivia never transferred the property. Your ultimate conclusion gives no points. I like it just so I know one point is ending and another point is going to begin. But as far as getting points on the exam, I'm interested in mostly your reasons. Why do you think Abel owns the property? But in the alternative, why do you think Baker owns the property? And 1Ls who do well can not just get along with this gray, this ambiguity, they actually embrace it and they actually get to enjoy it, because there aren't many disciplines out there where you can, on a final exam, give two alternative answers. It could be A, but then again, it could be B, and that's great, and that's what we want, so long as you lay out your reasons.
Yeah, I tried that in algebra, and it didn't go over very well.
It won't work too well in algebra. In law school, it works great, and in the practice of law, it works great, because we get you into the mindset that one day you may represent a plaintiff, one day you may represent a defendant, and you have to be exposed to and be comfortable with this world of gray, because every appellate case a student reads is a real case, and it was gray. You had the plaintiff going to the appellate court, the defendant going to the court, so each side thought they could win. Obviously, one of them does, but until that decision came down, it was gray. That's what we lawyers deal with, gray. We deal with that all the time. And for those of you who are economically minded, the bigger the gray, probably the bigger the billing, the billable fee, the billable hours.
Let's not forget that.
Yes.
Okay, more questions.
More questions.
I have Alejandra from,
yes.
We don't know where she's from, but she has a beautiful name.
Wherever you are, welcome.
Okay, what is the main difference between an A student and a B student? Her follow-up question is, what do the students at the top of the class have in common?
The best students, and I'll combine these two very thoughtful questions. The A students do two things. They, on the exam, identify the legal problems, more legal problems than the B students, and they address those legal problems in greater depth than the B students. So it's a matter of, to some extent, quantity, and also quality, the degree of the depth that they go into resolving the problem.
So they're spotting more issues.
Yes.
Which issue spotting is a big buzzword. All you 1Ls will become intimately familiar with that.
And the legal issues are the legal problems. What's involved here? What are the people fighting about? Those are what we call issues.
So because most people haven't yet experienced the law school, give us an example of some issues that someone would find in a property exam. Like, what kinds of issues are they looking for?
Well, for example, we cover the law of adverse possession. And the question would be, does someone merely possessing someone else's land, this is quite stunning, actually become the owner of
it
that?
Depends.
It depends. Here's another example, and I'll use a criminal law, because a lot of people, you just read about criminal law in the newspapers, not as much property. Here's an example. Let's suppose you have a homeless man who lives in his car, and you have a defendant who breaks into that car while the homeless man is sleeping in his car. And the question is this a common law battery, a common law burglary? Well, wait a minute. For common law burglary, the defendant has to break and enter in the nighttime to commit a theft in the dwelling house of another. Mm-hmm. Well, a car, is this a dwelling house? Well, most people use a car for travel, but a homeless person is using this car to sleep in. Do we discriminate against this homeless person and not give him protection under the law because he does not have a traditional home? And so this is what one issue on one law school exam might be. Why is this car a dwelling for purposes of burglary? Why is this car not a dwelling for purposes of burglary? And there's no definitive answer. And this is what law school is all about. So an A student would see, for purposes of common law burglary, the problem here is whether this car is a dwelling house. The B student may not see that, may see that, but will not go into the depth of explanation. So, for example, the A student would go into perhaps and there's a million different answers because there's no definitive right or wrong, maybe a policy concern. Well, society should protect everyone from evildoers, and it shouldn't be based on wealth. But on the other hand, what do we do with a person taking a nap in his car? Are we going to expand the law so that every time someone takes a nap in a car that a burglary is found? You could think of other answers. There could be 100 different answers. Everyone could be correct. But A students will identify more questions, more problems than B students, and they will address them in much greater depth than the B student.
Okay, so we have another question back. We're going to go back to ambiguity. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
That's a very unambiguous answer. Everett from Atlanta. Hot Atlanta. Hi,
Hello.
Everett. How do you embrace ambiguity on exams, and how do you cover gray areas and still do well? You may have answered that in your question, but do you have any final words on ambiguity for Everett?
Yeah, it's addressed on the exam in the part of the essay, in most law school exams, well, some teachers will have multiple choice tests, which is not a typical multiple choice test, but that's perhaps a separate webinar.
We'll have another webinar on that later in the year.
The gray is addressed in what we call analysis. That is, you take the rule of law that you think that will address the problem, and you address the problem. That is, you solve the problem. So in my hypothetical with the alleged burglary of the homeless man's car, a student would give what that student thinks is reasonable answers for why this car is a burglary. Notice there's the why again.
Right.
Why is addressed with because. Well, this should be considered a dwelling for purposes of burglary because becomes a very
because
important
someone's
word.
living in the car. All his
living
possessions are in the car.
And so it takes on the characteristics of a home. Moreover, and so that's a logical answer. Then there's a policy answer, which is we don't want to protect just people who are wealthy enough to have traditional housing. We want to protect people who have even non-traditional housing. And there could be hundreds of reasons why this car is and is not a burglary, but on the exam, that's what students are graded on. And that's why law school exams are so different, because of this grade. No definitive right or wrong, as I say, and I say it again, I don't give any credit even for your ultimate conclusion, whether the car is or is not a dwelling house for purposes of burglary. But you get credit for identifying the problem, stating the proper rule of burglary, and then telling the professor why this car is and is not, because it's always and when there's purposeful gray inserted in the exam, why it's both a dwelling house and not a dwelling house, and then you ultimately conclude. And again, the conclusion is really irrelevant.
And think. Use your...
It's all about thinking. It's all about thinking. And I'll just, if I can tell a very small story.
Please, go right ahead.
I'm a lawyer now. I have my first case, and one of my professors helped get me this case. And so I would go to him from time to time for advice, and came time I had to write a trial brief. And he says to me, Ira, have you ever written a trial brief before? I said, no. He says, okay, I'm now going to tell you how you write a trial brief. You go into your office, you close the door, you put your feet up on your desk, you light up a cigar, and you think.
That was back when you could smoke indoors.
Yes.
You don't do that anymore.
So, except for the cigar, indoors, it's the same method. You think. And let me just say, some people may be thinking, well, I'm really not sure what you mean by thinking. I'll give you another example. When you prepare for your classes, you're thinking by reading your cases and critically thinking as you go through those cases. So that's one way of thinking. Another way of thinking is when you're in the classroom, you're taking selective notes. No, you're not taking a transcript. Some students are there typing away, trying to get every word. That's not how you take notes. You take notes by thinking. What do I need to more fully understand this case? It's not every word. If taking down every word was the epitome of a great lawyer, then court reporters would be the best lawyers in the world. And so that's another aspect of thinking. You write and think and write. You do that when you're taking your class notes. You do that on the exam. And I have that in my book several times. Write and think and write and think. That's what we lawyers do. And so finally, then when you're finished going to class, taking notes, what you have to do is you put together a course outline. And a course outline is not something magical. A course outline is just synthesizing what you've learned from your cases, what you've learned in the class, and putting it together in some manageable form. It's a mini book. It's a mini book. Why do you want to write a mini book? Because there's a lot to memorize, but you can't memorize by rote. There's too many, so you memorize by understanding. Our discussion today, we don't have this laid out. You're not reading from a script. I'm not reading from a script.
No, of course not.
But we understand this stuff, and so it's part of us. It's part of our DNA by now. It's part of our soul, and that's what you want to do. You write an outline, thinking all the way through, putting together all your cases, all of your class notes, and when you put it together in this mini book, what we'll call an outline, then you have thought your way through to excellence. Then you're ready to take your exam. And outlining is not something that is cut and paste. It's all about, yet again, thinking. And everyone who's watching this, you'll get good doses of thinking just by going to your law school classes, because we 1L professors know that you're really new at this. We'll guide you along the way. We'll help you to get set into your thinking mode.
I have a question from someone from your home state.
New York.
New York. Thank God I got that right. I would have been really embarrassed.
Or if I can revert to my Brooklyn accent.
Please do.
New York.
New York.
New York.
All right, we got Marcus from New York. I'm going to stop that right now. His question is, reading aside. Okay, move the reading over to the side. What is the most important skill to work on that will help him during his first year?
Dare I say it?
I don't know. I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm not 100% sure. Thinking. What about time management?
Time management is important, but they're all related because, again, everything you do in law school, reading, taking class notes, putting together your outline, not cut and paste, it's thinking. Having said that, though, you have to manage your time, too, because you have a limited amount of time. And so while it may be wonderful to spend, 12, 15 hours a day on my favorite course, property, you just can't do that. And so what I tell students to manage their time is this. And if you do this, you'll never have any time management problem. Put everything on a calendar, and I mean everything. From the moment that you get up in the morning, having breakfast, brushing your teeth, going in for a shower, commute to school, reading your torts assignment, outlining your contracts material, everything that you do goes on a calendar. And then you end your calendar whenever it is, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And so from 10 to 6, you put that, sleep. Everything goes on the calendar. If you put everything on the calendar and don't vary from it, you'll have generally enough time to do everything. Once in a while, you may be cut short. That's okay. But in the by and by, put everything on the calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, we all have the propensity, the ability to waste time. So if you want to spend 3 hours on property from 4 to 7 p.m., then by golly, put 3 hours of property on your calendar, and you'll probably stick with it.
I think that is a great skill. I still calendar pretty much my whole life, like weeks in advance.
Many of us do.
But I mean, you've been doing this a while. I was a pretty successful law student here. Just tell them the shortcuts. Let's talk about the shortcuts.
Shortcuts. Here's the
You're going to hear it now. You heard it here first. No one ever tells you the shortcuts. Go
Hold
ahead.
on. There are none. That's it. There are no shortcuts. Look. Some people want to take shortcuts. What's a shortcut? instead of reading and briefing, a brief is just a summary. You write it out. It's a real short summary of the case that you read. They'll use what we call canned briefs. They're available online. That's a shortcut. Cutting classes, that's another shortcut. Reading a model answer from an essay exam instead of actually sitting down and writing it out under exam conditions, taking your lumps as you go through it, because that's real learning. These are all shortcuts. Don't do shortcuts. You're here to learn. You're not here to do shortcuts. Shortcuts in the long run don't work. They may not even work in the short term. They just don't work. You have to read and brief your cases. You need to go to class. You need to take selective, thoughtful notes. You need to put together a course outline, because as I alluded to, but if I didn't say it expressly, I'll say it now. The reason you do a course outline is so that all of this material becomes part of your DNA, part of your soul. And if you want to be an expert in something, write a book on it. You know, my book, First Year Law School Success, I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours on end. If you think this is a lot of talking, oh, just come on and visit me and I can talk forever. Why? I didn't try to memorize any of this stuff, but because I sat and struggled with it for hours and hours, it's part of my DNA now. I know everything in my book, and any author of any book knows everything about that book. So don't shortcut anything. If you want to get your fair share of A's, you can, but that means you can't shortcut. Read and brief your cases, go to class, take selective notes, put together a course outline, and then for what we call dead week, when you're just studying for your final exams, take some practice exams under exam conditions, no cheating, and you'll be fine.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
Oh, yeah, that's right, it is.
It is a lot of work, but thousands have done it before you. Thousands will do it after you. Not you. All those fine individuals watching us today. But that's a line that I have given to my students through the years. Just that, thousands. It's a lot of work, but thousands have done it before you. Thousands will do it after you. And so just put your mindset to, this is what I have to do. Put everything on a calendar. The time becomes very manageable if you do that. Remember, everything goes on that calendar.
This may sound a little cray-cray, but I remember that process and I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed that mental tug of war and hashing out the elements of a tort with my student colleagues. I really loved it so much that I was afraid to leave law school and go out into the big bad world. I really enjoyed the experience.
And that's why you and I are back here. Having said that, both of us are practicing lawyers, lest you think that we're just regurgitating what we learned in books. Both of us practice. And it is enjoyable because it's this gray with no definitive right or wrong. How many places can you go to for higher education or any education where the professor is not interested per se in your ultimate answer? Rather, the professor is interested in your process in getting to that answer. It's a tremendous mental workout. It's a wonderful workout.
And if it sounds like it's not, and it sounds horrible, then I don't know, go to med school. Just kidding.
Go to med school where you can memorize all the bones in the human body.
There is an answer. This
That's
is a
right.
bone. Okay, we have another question from the beautiful town, very fun town of Chicago. I don't want to butcher this name. It's either Kara, so sorry. How do you assimilate all the information from your classes, and how do you do it with the limited time you have?
That's another great question. You're going to assimilate, put all of this material together from the cases that you read and summarized, and it's a real brief summary, your selective class notes. You're going to assimilate this, put it together in a course outline. You're going to write a mini book on property, a mini book on torts, a mini book on contracts. And by writing this mini book, not cutting and pasting, but thinking as you go along, what's the definition of this? How does this case illustrate this? Why is this here versus down here? When you struggle with this and writing this mini book, that's when you're going to put all of this together, and that's when you're going to have it hardwired into your head. And that's what I say when I say that it becomes part of your soul or your DNA. You will have it memorized, not because you sat down with some flashcards and tried to memorize it like the preamble to the Constitution.
Go ahead.
Remember that. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union,
establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and
secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And we had to memorize this when we were in junior high school.
Schoolhouse rock.
And when I was 12 years old and I memorized that, I didn't know what the heck I was saying because I didn't understand it. I didn't think. You could do that by rote when you're talking about something very, very small, like the preamble to the Constitution. You can't do that in law school. Property is so vast. Torts are so vast. All your courses are so vast. There's too many rules, too many doctrines. But when you put it together in this mini book that I call it, a course outline, it will make sense to you in your struggle to see how it all works. You'll have all the rules memorized without trying to memorize it. And that's when you're well on your way to an end.
So I have a question that I get all the time on the live chat. And if you're over on Southwestern's website and you want to talk to me, just click on the little live chat button and I'll continue to answer your questions as much as I can. Laptops in the classroom. There's a rumor going around that some of the professors don't allow laptops in the classroom. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. There are some professors, and this is in all the law schools in the country, some professors will not allow laptops in their classroom. I don't, by the way. I allow laptops. Why is this? There's several reasons. Sometimes students aren't taking notes. They're emailing, they're surfing the web, whatever it is. Some students are diligently taking notes, but here's the thing. Studies have shown at the college level, not at the law school level, maybe it's the same, maybe it's not, I don't know, but at the college level, studies have shown that students who take notes by hand with pen and paper, like when I was in law school without dealing with age.
We didn't really have a choice. Just FYI, there were no
computers then. But studies have shown that if you take selective notes by hand on paper, you retain more and you retain it much longer than if you're typing away. So that's why some teachers don't want it. They want students to really become immersed in the learning process, taking selective notes, and that there's something to be said for that hand-eye-brain coordination. I don't do that, though. I let students do what they feel better with, but I will tell you this. In the last few years, I have many more students now taking notes on yellow memo pads with a pen than I did 5 years ago.
Well, when you're typing, you're listening and you're typing.
Right.
You're not processing.
You're not processing as much. That's right.
It just becomes automatic. I even look down sometimes when I'm doing it, taking minutes, and my errors are phonetic errors, which really shows I'm not processing anything. Right. I'm just like a court reporter, using the sounds and putting the sounds onto the page.
Right. And for students who can type very fast, they have a propensity of trying to get down every word that's being said. You don't want to do that. What you want, because then you're not processing. Right. You're not, there we go again, you're not thinking. But when you sit and you take only selective notes, adding something to your notes that you didn't have in your case brief, you didn't think about before, such as a professor's hypothetical. Okay, now you're talking, now you're thinking and writing and thinking, again, which is what you'll do on your exams. And so taking notes by pen and paper probably is better than typing on a computer.
Okay, I agree. I'm with you on that. Okay,
all right.
The questions are slowing down, so just want to remind everybody that those 100 people that are in our interactive module, please send us your questions. We still have lots of sins to go through. We'll go back and talk about more sins. If you don't ask us questions, I'll dream them up. But this is a particularly important sin. When we first started talking about this webinar, I actually put into practice this the opposite, so not committing this sin. And I instantly found out that I just felt better and my mind was sharper. So let's talk about sleep.
Sleep is really, really important. You have to get enough sleep. And I know too many students here at Southwestern, other institutions, who want more time to do their studies. Very noble. So what do they cut out? Sleep. Bad, bad, bad move. When you're cutting back on sleep, you're not going to be fresh. Your mental agility will slow down, and you're actually hurting your body. The reason scientists for years and years never knew, why does the human body actually need sleep? Why can't you just rest? And the answer that some scientists have come up with is that when we sleep, we're actually helping to repair our body. Because if the body is not repaired, then you become susceptible to all sorts of diseases, viruses, and it's really not good to have come down with the flu while you're in the middle of law school. That's bad. And so eating well and sleeping well really becomes important. In my article, The 7 Deadly 1L Sins, I make reference to a story in the New York Times. The reporter for the New York Times interviewed a professional CIA interrogator, retired, but that's what his job was, to interrogate terrorists. And he said, never once in my career did I ever lay a hand on a terrorist. Never deprived him of food. The only thing he did do was deprive him of sleep. And after just a few days of no sleep, the terrorist gave it all up, told the interrogator everything he wanted to know. Why? Because the need for sleep is so critical. Without sleep, we will die. The immune system will break down and there will be terrible disease. So you want to get enough sleep, 1, so you don't get sick, 2, so you stay mentally alert. So students often ask, well, how much sleep do I need? The answer is really very simple.
It depends.
Actually, here's one that it doesn't depend.
Okay.
How's that? The same number of hours you needed before law school, that's what you need in law school. Here's another trick to find out if you're getting enough sleep.
Okay.
If you need an alarm clock to get up in the morning, you're not getting enough sleep.
I thought that just meant I was really stressed out and I woke up because I was afraid I was going to oversleep. But I guess it could go either way on that one.
That could go either way. So you gotta get your sleep. Make sure you have enough sleep. It's very diligent to cut certain non-productive things out. Cancel your account with Instagram. That might help you free up more time, but don't cut back on your sleep. It's way, way too important. If you needed 8 hours before law school, you need 8 hours during law school.
So there was a financial planner that I follow named Dave Ramsey, and he said, it was a few years ago, but like, stop farmvilling, stop cultivating your imaginary cranberries and pay attention to your finances. So same thing, right? Cut out something that's superfluous.
And don't cut out what's so critical, because here's the other thing. When you're tired, you can't think straight. And so when you're fully rested, then you can think straight, then you can embrace ambiguity, then you can tackle the world of gray, and then you can be on your way to an A in your courses.
Great. Okay. So Everett, again from Atlanta. Hello again.
Welcome.
This is good. This is a compound question, so I'm going to read the whole thing.
Okay.
On exams, do professors care more about reason more than they care about proper grammar and spelling? Relatedly, do the notes we take in class ever get submitted to professors, whether with exams or any other reason? I like the way you think, Everett.
The first question first. You get graded on your content, typographical errors. Some schools allow spell check for typists, and that's all fine. But even if there's some errors in grammar, look, this is a first draft. A law school final exam is a first draft. We all know it's a first draft. And you know what Ernest Hemingway said about first drafts. Ernest Hemingway said, every first draft is, well, terrible, I'll say. He said something else. He used a term that I don't think is appropriate here. But first drafts are terrible. We all know that. So is there going to be some typographical errors, grammatical errors, errors in syntax? Of course, no one cares about that. To be sure, your exam has to be intelligible, and if I don't know what you're talking about, that's a problem. I've never run across that in all my decades of teaching. So that's the first question. You're graded you're not downgraded for typographical
But I
errors.
do want to clarify something. Typographical errors, fine, missing a comma, forgetting an Oxford comma, but the complete suspension of capitalization and punctuation and abbreviations, this is not a text message.
And that's exactly what I tell my students. I tell my students on the last day of class that you have to remember you are submitting a written work to a professor, no different than when you submit an appellate brief or a trial brief to your writing professor or to a court in, dare I say it, the real world. And so you have to conform. That's a great question. You have to conform to rules of convention. Capitalize paragraphs, and your writing teachers will reinforce this. But yes, what I always tell my students, just what you said, you're submitting a legal document, your exam, to your professor for a grade. You are not texting a friend, so you have to conform to convention.
I actually had an exam submitted to me with no capitals, the first word of the sentence, no capitals, no paragraphs. And then the student came to me and was very upset. And I said, well, it's just a big blob of words. I can't get through it. Maybe everything's in there, which gets you to your high rack scenario. But I couldn't even find, everything was buried in this big lump of text. And he literally looked me in the face and said, well, since when does that count?
Yeah.
So it actually does always count.
It always counts. And again, you have to conform to structure, because that's what lawyers do. Lawyers have to write briefs, motions that conform to a certain structure. It's not a stream of consciousness approach to writing, and you learn all about that in your legal writing classes that everyone else takes.
But I think mistakes are okay. Like,
everyone makes some mistakes. It's a first draft. There's going to be mistakes, but failure to use throughout uppercase letters when uppercase letters are appropriate.
And writing you are instead of your, and things like that. Don't do that. Again, you're not texting a friend. You're submitting a legal document to your professor. What was the second? I'm going to go back to that. So he says, you have beautiful grammar and punctuation, by the way, Everett. Relatedly, do the notes we take in class ever get submitted to professors, whether with exams or any other reason?
The short answer, it's a good question.
Yeah.
The short answer is no. Your class notes are your study aids to help you understand. I have never asked my students to hand in their case briefs, their summaries of the cases that they read before class. I've never asked for outlines. I've never asked for class notes. There's a significant amount of personal responsibility on law school, in law school, much more so than any other learning you've gone through. And that's appropriate, because we're training you to be lawyers, to represent people, to protect their liberty, to protect their property. That's a really big deal. That's what we lawyers do. We either protect liberty or we protect property in one way or another, whatever area of law we go into. And so the idea of personal responsibility is consistent with people who are going to be guardians for the law.
So this scenario might bring in multiple sins. This really happened. A student sitting middle of the class, not taking any notes, listening. I was really happy that the student was listening, never opened a laptop, never took a note, sat there very stoically, appeared to be paying attention, wasn't shopping or Facebooking. And I spoke to them after class, said, hey, you don't take any notes. He goes, I belong to the XX Society. We have a whole file. We have all the notes from all this class, like from all the past years.
Question. It's a great question.
What do you think about that?
You will, in your law school career, as you've just said, Professor Kane, come across shortcuts, and it's just a variation of it. Someone who already has an outline for Shafiroff's property class, someone who's already briefed all of the cases for Shafiroff's casebook in his property class. don't use it. It's a shortcut because you have to do in order to learn. If you just read what someone else wrote, this is passive learning. And we know from studies, passive learning is not effective. You will forget what you read within a matter of hours. But if you write something out, if you struggle with it, why is this here versus here? Why here rather than here? What does this mean? How does this case illustrate this? This is active learning, and with active learning, that's when it becomes hardwired into your brain. This is when it becomes part of your DNA, and you don't have to worry about these dopey flashcards that some students use. You don't need them when you memorize by understanding. So there's the long answer to your question.
That's a great answer. It's a great question, but the process of making the flashcards might actually be useful when you're
it's the process, making them, doing is what's critical. Putting together your outline, putting together your case brief, putting together, if you're so inclined, a flashcard. But the key is it's your own flashcard, it's your own case brief, it's your own outline. It's not a commercially purchased one.
Okay, we have a great question, and this is particularly relevant for law schools like ours that has part-time program, and a lot of our students coming in might be a little older. They're coming right from work to school. They've been in the workforce for a while. So Alexandra asks, how does someone who has been out of undergrad for a while transition to law school?
That's another good question. The way you transition is to simply do a few basic things. One, put everything on the calendar. And two, do everything that we've been talking about. Read and brief cases, go to class, take selective notes. You don't have to worry that you've been out of school 5, 10. I've had students 20 years out of school. You'll get into it. It's sort of like riding a bicycle. Once you learn, you really never forget. You just have to start doing it. So I wouldn't be concerned that you've been out of school for 10, 20 or more years even. Just start doing it. Doing is what counts. Doing is what will hardwire all of this stuff into your brain and make for a successful law school career.
And I remember my first day as an evening student. In my section were nurses, medical doctors, a lot of engineers. I mean, a lot of people brought to part of our diversity was having people from all walks of life and a lot of different ages. I think last year our oldest student was 48.
Yeah,
and we've had people in their 60s.
We've had people in their 60s. And of course, you know my background. I was a night student myself. I was an IRS agent during the day, and I went to Southwestern at night. And that's how I did it.
And I worked in several law firms and the appellate division of the district attorney's office, and then raced to campus every night.
So then again, for people who are doing it part-time, whether because you're working at night or whether you have childcare or adult care responsibilities during the day, I'll say again what I tell my students. Thousands, and this was actually told to me when I was in law school, thousands have done it before you, thousands will do it after you.
Okay. Great question, kind of a nice segue. Zachary from the Marine Corps, what options for law school are available to people who are still working or have other commitments like active duty in the Marine Corps? And is there an opportunity to attend remotely? And how does this affect learning your first year?
Well, there's a lot of questions.
A lot of questions. Let me address the one about remote learning.
Okay.
So this is like right into what we've just updated the whole website. To talk about, our evening program has been completely reimagined. So if you're working really any more than just a few hours, you really probably are going to be attending part-time. So we have part-time day programs, but we also have this amazing part-time evening program where you only come to campus twice a week now. So if you're starting in fall, you come on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Which is a big difference from years ago where a student would come 3 or even 4 days a week on campus.
Yeah. And, you know, traffic's not getting any better, as Dean Susan loves to say. LA traffic's not getting any better. So active duty, I don't know. That might be hard. But if you can make it Tuesday and Wednesday to campus and attend remotely the rest, I mean, it is doable. We also go to the webpage /military. We're a yellow ribbon school. We're really military friendly, like literally military friendly. We love our armed forces. We have students that are in and are going into things like JAG Corps.
Right.
And there's a lot of support here. So Zachary, I'm going to put you in touch with think his name is Zach, who's actually our military private correspondent for you. So we'll make sure you get perfect answers. But definitely a lot of students, most of the part-time students here, all work full-time or are taking care of a parent or have a lot of obligations other than school. So it's about good time management and striking a balance.
That's it. And it's all doable. Put everything on a calendar, and this is all very doable. You're going to chew up a lot of time reading and briefing and outlining and going to class or watching on a screen, but this is all very doable because the program, at least at Southwestern, is designed just for that, for someone who has outside responsibilities and can't devote all of their time to study.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have a 2-year, almost year-round, there are breaks, year-round program where you can complete your JD in 2 years.
2 years.
Which sounds incredibly intimidating to someone that took 4 years. I don't think scales for me.
I taught in scale, property in scale. My syllabus is the same, the material is the same. But yeah, I've taught in scale, and it goes at faster speed. So traditionally, my property class is 2 days a week, 2 hours per class. It's a 4-unit class. In the scale division, 2 years, which scale stands for Southwestern's Conceptual Approach to Legal Education. It's the exact same syllabus, but instead of 2 days a week, it's 3 days a week. And that's how we do it in 10 weeks instead of 14 weeks in traditional. You're learning the exact same thing in scale as you would traditional, but it's just more condensed. Great program.
Great program. More questions, send us your questions. Until then, we're going to break out into the war stories, so bear with us. But I want to ask you a question back to the integrity and the honor code. Tell me some examples. Give us some examples of ways that your students or students in general can run afoul of the honor code. Give us some good war stories.
Just without going into any detail, which
I want names.
I don't want to, and but just from cases that are reported, students make mistakes, but it's typically not a mistake that will create the problem. It's an affirmative decision to break a rule. What are some examples? Plagiarism. And you can go into the Westlaw or Lexis, and those are legal databases that you'll all be using.
We have software for that now. We will catch you.
Students, it doesn't happen often. Throughout the nation, it's very rare, but it does happen. The student plagiarizes. At a minimum, the student is going to fail the course. At a minimum, the student is going to be suspended and might even be expelled. But even if the student isn't expelled, there's going to be a mark of discipline, character discipline on the student's transcript, which is going to damn the student. So that's a real extreme case. But another case, not as extreme, but still a wrong, still will trigger an honor code violation. Many schools require, based on the ABA, the American Bar Association attendance requirements, that you sign in for an attendance sheet or some electronic version of signing in. Well, if your friend is out sick, don't do him a favor in signing him in, whether electronically or physically, because that's not honest either. So you never want to engage in any activity that even comes close to dishonesty. What I always tell my students is, before you do it, ask yourself, would my mother be proud of me if she found out? If your answer is, my mother would not be proud, then don't do it. Don't even think of doing it. Play it by the book. Channel John the Baptist, the epitome of integrity.
So Juliana from Washington is right on topic with us. She asks, do violations of the honor code or even state federal laws follow you into your profession or affect admission to your state bar?
The answer to both is yes. If you're convicted of a crime before law school, during law school, or found to have violated the school's honor code, it will follow you, and it depends what the wrong is. But if it's a wrong that goes to character, such as plagiarism, for example, if it's signing in your friend's name to an attendance sheet when your friend wasn't there, these go to your integrity, and this is going to impact your legal career. At a minimum, when you fill out your bar application form and it asks you, have you ever been sanctioned by any school for matters of integrity? I'm not talking about getting a bad grade in a course or failing a course. No one's concerned about that. What they're concerned about with is integrity. And if you check the box yes, and you have to explain, guaranteed 100%, that will slow down the process. They're going to investigate that. Now, you may still be admitted to the bar. You may still be, especially if it's not a grave wrong, but it's going to slow down your admission. So all your friends who passed the bar exam, they're now sworn in, and you still have to wait until the bar finishes its investigation. 6 months, maybe a year, maybe longer. So yes, it follows you. Moreover, it will follow you in the sense that for every prospective employer, you're going to have to submit your transcript. And once that mark of discipline, again, I'm not talking about probation because you failed a course. That's not what we're talking about. But discipline because of the integrity problem, you'll have many prospective employers who will just not even consider hiring you. And certainly jobs that require a security clearance, no way, no how, under any circumstances. So it does follow you. So, but it's not that hard to stay on the traditional path. Just don't do anything that's dishonest. If you stay on that traditional path, you'll have no problem. And let me just end by saying, if you have a question of whether you should or should not do something, you can either ask a professor. They'll always be pleased to speak with you. Or better yet, just don't even do it. If you have to ask, can I do this? The answer probably is don't do it.
Okay, that's great. We promised everyone the straight dope, and there's a term that's thrown around, moral turpitude, right? So if you have a bunch of parking tickets, probably okay. But if you let
Probably not moral turpitude.
If you let those parking tickets go and now you have a bench warrant that you're ignoring, or you got a DUI, I mean, there are certain crimes and things that you do that really can affect your ability to get certified by your state bar.
That's right. If a person has parking tickets, that's not moral turpitude. That's not something so base that the state bar is going to say, we don't want this person. If a person has a DUI, that's not a matter of moral turpitude. But once you start getting into really base behavior, especially base behavior where another person was impacted, where, for example, you've had 3 DUIs and the last one, heaven forbid, you crashed your car substantially injuring someone, now you may be talking about a matter of moral turpitude. But even having said that, it depends when all of this happened. Maybe all of this happened 25 years ago, and since that time, you've never had any problem with drinking and the law because you understand that what you did was wrong. That's also going to be very, very favorable, and in those circumstances, probably okay.
But we know you're not going to do that because now you know that the honor code violation or doing something horrible like that is a sin.
That's right.
You're not going to be sinners.
It is indeed.
We have a little more than a minute.
Okay.
Are there any final words or closing words for our guests?
Well, all that I would suggest is don't shortcut, play it by the book, make sure you don't violate any honor code provision, and embrace the ambiguity, embrace the gray, and you'll be okay.
Got a last minute question from Jessica, and I think it's really important, hopefully not inspired by our webinar today. What advice do you give someone who feels like giving up?
Don't give up. It's easy to give up. Keep going on because you're probably just tired. You're probably exhausted. Don't give up. Speak to your professors. Speak to your dean of students, but don't just give up. Everyone experiences difficulty at some point in time in law school. Everyone has to overcome various kinds of barriers and problems. Don't give up. Keep going. Bang your head against the wall long enough. Eventually, the wall will break.
I think at one point, most students want to give up there at that point. I wanted to give up. Do you know what I did? I came to talk to my dean of students. And he doesn't even remember, but you were great. You talked me out of it. He didn't remember.
That's right.
You saved my whole career, and he doesn't remember. But I remember. But talk to somebody, right? If you need help, ask for help. Lots of resources wherever school you attend. So that's our time.
Okay.
And we will be posting links, if we haven't already, on how to get to the article, how to get to the book. And for today only, Amazon is deeply discounted.
Right.
Your very fantastic book, which is behind us here, First Year Law School Success. We have a great crew on the other side of the cameras. We've got Stephen, Lily, and Nancy, and Doug in absentia helped us set the whole thing up. And I want to thank you for giving us your morning and subjecting yourself to my harsh interrogation techniques.
It was all my pleasure.
I did even have to waterboard you. And I'm guessing you got a good night's sleep, so
that didn't
work. But we really mostly want to thank all of you. Thank you for registering. Thank you for your fantastic questions. And we want to wish you the best of luck as future 1Ls, whether you come to Southwestern or go to another great school. We'll see you next time. This is Prof K and Prof S out.